in my office here down in the basement, and I don't always get great cell reception. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem at all. So Dan, first and foremost, how much responsibility do you put on Urban Meyer for his players off the field issues? And ultimately, where do you draw the line with Meyer or with any college football coach? Where do you draw the line between coach and mentor or father figure?
It's a really difficult question to answer because, in the pro game, a coach is basically just a coach.
Right.
They have relationships with their players, certainly, but there's no illusion that the coach is there for any reason other than to coach the team.
Mm-hmm.
College, for a lot of different reasons, some valid and some that are more mythical, has elevated the idea of a coach to something much more than just coaching.
Right.
And that makes it very tricky, especially when you are dealing with the highest level programs where sometimes what goes on off the field is unsavory.
Mm-hmm.
And so I cannot blame a coach for especially the actions of somebody 5 years after they're out of college. I mean, that's sort of a difficult one for me to get my arms around. However, I do think that when college coaches don't have at least some sort of standard of discipline in their program, it starts to show up in a lot of different areas. And I think that if Urban Meyer would ever be honest about what happened in Florida, he would have to acknowledge that the off-field problems
Mm-hmm.
with a number of players created a culture at Florida that ultimately showed up on the field in the level of play.
And my concern with it is that, and you said if he was honest, because when he came out last week, he spoke with newspaper down in Florida, and then spoke with the Columbus Dispatch. In the Florida newspaper story, he eventually just buried himself in a deeper hole when he kind of put the blame on Florida, saying that they covered up the multiple failed drug tests. And on top of that all, in relation to that 2007 shooting that involved Hernandez, he said, quote, "I didn't think about it until a couple of days ago." So is Urban by all this? Should he have just kept his mouth shut? Or if he did, address this issue, don't you think that he should have just been honest with it, being so far, being pretty far removed from his Florida days?
Well, it's hard for me to sit here and say what Urban Meyer should or shouldn't have said. But, just in terms of PR 101, you're always better off sort of admitting or acknowledging faults.
Right.
As opposed to trying to pass them off onto somebody else or deny that they exist, especially when the preponderance of evidence in Urban Meyer's time at Florida shows that they did have discipline issues.
Right.
And that maybe they weren't always dealt with in the most stern manner. Urban is just, he has always sort of promoted this narrative that not only is he a winner, he wins the right way. And, they sort of trotted, Tebow out there
Mm-hmm.
to be the face of that while it was happening. And he has always reacted very negatively to any sort of suggestion that there was a seedy underbelly to his success. But I think the narrative is now backed up by enough evidence that it's hard for Meyer to argue against it.
And on kind of a grander scheme, it seems that when, especially in college football, when your coach is there, you praise him, he's doing the right things according to the fans, according to the media. But when they leave, when they leave on kind of bad terms, for instance, when Brett Bielema left Wisconsin to go to Arkansas, then it's like, oh, well, they did everything wrong. Their accomplishments are kind of pushed out the window. So with that in mind, what is the reception, of what you have heard, the reception at Florida of Urban Meyer? And on the flip side, what is the reception at Ohio State of Urban Meyer as well?
Well, I think that Florida fans are much more willing now to admit that there were problems because Urban is no longer there.
Right.
If Urban was still there and winning national titles, I think they'd be much less inclined to acknowledge that or admit that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just the nature of fandom.
Right.
I think at Ohio State, they're obviously in the position Florida fans were in 5 years ago, where they were vigorously defending everything that went on. I don't necessarily blame them for that, but I think that that only exists within the bubble of Ohio State, where it's hard to be objective about Urban Meyer, especially when he is just coming off an undefeated season.
Dan Wolken, USA Today college football reporter, joining us. Dan, we'll get you out of here on one last question. Since, of course, I'm in Wisconsin country, I've got to ask you, how do you think new head coach Gary Andersen is going to do in year one with Wisconsin?
I think that he's obviously a very good coach. He built an excellent program at Utah State, and I think that there are a lot of cultural reasons why he'll fit in very well. I don't think Wisconsin. From a roster standpoint, I don't think they were left in terrible shape. But just with a new coach and adjustments and all those things, it's hard to say. I wouldn't expect Wisconsin to fall off the map. I think Gary Andersen is a very competent coach. Whether he can replicate the success that Brett Bielema had over the long haul is going to be the question, not necessarily what he does this year.
Well, Dan, appreciate the time and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
That is USA Today reporter Dan Wolken. He covers college football for them. Some very interesting comments he had. I just think that I think Urban Meyer is all about winning, and that's it. I think that he doesn't put a lot of emphasis on off-the-field issues, and I think that's why, he had 33 arrests at Florida. Do you blame him directly for it? You can't, because at the end of the day, college coaches, NFL coaches are not babysitters. They're supposed to give these players guidelines and restrictions and limitations of what they should and should not do. But at the end of the day, when these players are in a certain situation, whether it's in a shooting incident down in Gainesville or whatever it is, they cannot monitor them 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Urban Meyer is still a crook. I'm still not a fan of Urban Meyer, but you can't blame him 100% for everything.